Is it possible to, in a region itself, because when I just want to understand, to selectively impose bans in only certain areas, like not complete district, but is it, can we do it on a selective basis? Do we have softwares or do you have the technology to do on a very localized selective basis?
We have the relevant technology by means of which we can actually focus and limit the internet shutdown to a very, very small, narrow geographical boundary. But most of the time, the service providers would tend to come up with a lame excuse that they can't do this particular thing because it's going to take more effort, energy, and expenditure. So more often than not, they say, please ban the internet in the entire area because it's convenient with me. But by and large, the technology very well exists. And I think as we now go forward, the government will have to quickly understand and utilize the efficacy of surgical internet shutdowns in a very, very systematic manner in very, very small geographical areas. Because otherwise shutting it down for other legitimate users is ultimately going to expose the government to even more litigation, because more and more people are now getting aware. They're getting conscious of the fact that if you are going to deprive me of my fundamental right to access the internet, I'm going to take the state to court. More so when I'm not myself either a perpetuator of an illegal activity, and more so when you have other efficacious remedies and processes available to deal with the potential law and order situation. Now, the moment the forces are on the ground, that's for a short period of time, the internet shutdown can be detained, but the quicker it's lifted, the better it is ultimately in terms of winning over the confidence of the people in the concerned area, that look, they're able to connect with the outside world, with the government agencies, using the internet rather than being bolted on into their own homes. So I think we have to now, as we go forward, look at more innovative ways of how to deal with these problems. Internet shutdowns till now have been, shall I say, been accepted, but now I expect more and more litigation coming in post-COVID-19 against these arbitrary random shutdowns. And then the courts will be then forced to judicially review every internet shutdown and say whether it was actually required or not. And in case if it was not required, then the relevant governmental official ought to be identified, and appropriate responsibility and accountability for the same also needs to be fulfilled. This assumes more significance because already the government is the biggest intermediary under the Information Technology Act 2000. It is itself required to exercise due diligence while it discharges its obligations under the law. And now, with the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill being laid before the monsoon session of Parliament, the government is going to have additional responsibilities. So now, we'll have to quickly realize that internet shutdowns is going to be a double-edged sword. The rarer they are used in exceptional cases, the better it will be. Otherwise, there'll be potential exposure for the government, the relevant officers, and the relevant stakeholders in such kinds of situations.
I'm just trying to also understand the kind of logistics that's involved. So you're telling me that we are dependent on the internet service providers to actually give in a shutdown. So the government cannot override them as such. Is that the case?
Well, the government has all the power to do so. The government can override, and the government can determine, look, please shut down the internet in this small area of 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers. That's all.
Okay.
Rather than shutting it down in a complete district. The government has the power, and in case if the service providers don't really comply with it, they violate not just their license conditions, but more significantly, they get stripped of their statutory exemption from legal liability as intermediaries under the Information Technology Act 2000, thanks to the IT Rules 2021, which have been updated as on 6th of April 2023. And as a result, they also potentially get exposed for being prosecuted for offences under the Indian Penal Code and under the Information Technology Act 2000. So the government is well within the powers. The quicker we sensitize the government that please utilize these powers only at the bare minimum extent possible to the minimum area that's required geographically, the better ultimately it's going to be. And let's force the service providers to implement appropriate measures, to implement the go-ahead, or as far as the specific geographical area limitation of internet shutdowns is concerned.
So, Mr. Duggal, I'm trying to also further understand now, if something of an internet shutdown has to be made, if it is coming from the police directly to the service providers? I mean, is that a possible communication that can be done from a station, for example, a circle inspector level onwards, or should it go through a series of red tapeism, which our country is very famous for, and then go as an instruction to the service provider? Is that the circuit that is there, or can be a direct communication? Just to understand what the existing law allows, or the structure allows.
The existing law allows for appropriate checks and balances, which means they have not wanted to give this particular power to the police. Why? The potentiality of this power being misused is going to be very high. That's the reason why it has to be going in the form of a specific power that's only given to the relevant government. That power can only be exercised in accordance with specified rules. The rules specify a particular process, a decision-making process. Decision has to be in writing. There has to be reasons for the same before such a internet shutdown can be ordered. Because why? Tomorrow, when it gets challenged in a court of law, it can potentially be shown as to why the government was justified in ordering this lockdown. The moment you're going to give up this power to all kinds of police officers, you'll find complete mayhem, complete anarchy coming in, and ultimately the very objectives of either the government or the Constitution or the Information Technology Act 2000 are not going to be fulfilled.
Well, that's quite interesting take, because when the violence happened in Noon, the violence had spread into Gurugram area, and Gurugram is considered to be, the highlight area for Haryana when it comes to its economic potential. You have a lot of tech companies that are there in Gurugram. So is it possible to have an internet that is completely meant only for the central business district that does not, shut off when we have a situation like this?
I think it's very much possible. The government needs to realize that there are some areas which are our showcase areas for the rest of the world. So assuming you have a internet shutdown and that affects entire Gurugram, which is now where most of the multinationals and big corporates are located, that suddenly starts pushing a negative prejudicial impact on the image and reputation of India. That maybe we potentially need to do our homework more. Therefore, vis-a-vis these nerve centers of cyber activity or cyber connectivity, I believe those need to be specifically retained in terms of their internet connectivity. It would also be a good idea to even go ahead and declare some of these areas as critical infrastructure areas. Why? Because you don't want internet to be stopped under any circumstances in these kinds of areas. But for that, appropriate rules have to be prepared. For that, appropriate political will of the government is required in this direction.
Let me get in A.K. Jain into this discussion as well. Well, you heard what Dugal has saying, that we cannot give it to the police officers, and of course it has to go through a circumstitious route, because there is a possibility of this power given to the police officer being completely misused. So that could be a possibility that is there. But do you also agree that the police shouldn't be having that power? There should be some intermediary, like the government itself, trying to give it. But when that is the case, how do you think that the concept of a surgical internet shutdown can be implemented? Because it is the local police who would be knowing which areas should be this thing. That information has to be passed on, and then the service providers could be able to. But if that, you have to wait till then. The officer on the ground to have some kind of an internet clampdown has to wait till then. That waiting period could be crucial, isn't it?
Senior officers are always aware of such incidents taking place in the district. They know where the trouble is brewing, where the law and order situation is there. They can always guide the government through district magistrate or directly through DGP that internet shutdown should take place in such and such police station areas. It can be done, and there is absolutely no problem in it. And I agree with Mr. Dugal that direct powers should not be given. Such draconian powers should not be given to local SHOs. It should be dealt at very senior level in the state government.